All right, so just to wrap up, if you were a little bit confused right at the end there, we're just saying, in summary, divergent evolution leads to differences in species that are closely related, so their genetic profiles will be much, much similar than those that have arisen from convergent evolution. So we see these differences in these same types of structures like limbs and stuff like that. Whereas convergent evolution is where we have similar or similarities in particular features that might not be genetically related because of the selection pressures have deemed that, you know, having the capacity to have a streamlined body is more favorable in that given environment. All right, then we get onto these ideas of succession. So there's two ways that succession actually arises. So succession is either deemed as primary or secondary succession. And what we're talking about when we talk about this concept of succession is how an ecosystem will change over time, and basically how the different types of populations in that ecosystem or in that environment will change over time, whether they're autotrophic organisms or heterotrophic organisms. And so we use the term primary and secondary basically to talk about a time scale of how that ecosystem actually evolves over time. So primary succession is where we get the development of an ecosystem over hundreds or thousands of years from nothing. So we get these sort of pioneer species that come first, the ones that can handle these environments being very barren and not having a lot of nutrients in the soils and things like that. And it's only after, you know, hundreds of years or things like that when we can start to get photosynthetic organisms that can actually start to die, decompose, and return a lot of nutrients to the soil, or actually allow for other species to come that will consume the photosynthetic organisms. So this type of succession takes a long time. So this is where we're getting basically nothing becoming something that is rich and sort of diverse and biodiverse, but it takes a very, very long time. So I'll let you read that and make your own notes of that. But when we look at secondary succession is where we've already got a semi-established ecosystem or environment, and what tends to happen is we have an event that occurs which causes not the nutrients in the soils to necessarily go away, but it causes basically a flat set of ground where new pioneer species can start to establish themselves. So we see secondary succession occur in, you know, up to 150 years. So we're going to see the evolution of that kind of succession happen much, much quicker because we've already got all the foundations there. We've already got nutrients in the soil because we've had, say, a bushfire or something else like a flood rip apart a particular environment. It's not as if we're starting from barren rock again. We're starting from places where you can get photosynthetic organisms pretty much establish themselves straight away, and other organisms and decomposers and things like that all come in and actually advance in 3, 4, 5 years rather than over 150 years plus just for the pioneer species. So remember, for your benefit here, primary succession is a long-term process that occurs from nothing, and it requires these organisms that actually need to be able to survive very harsh conditions, so very harsh selection pressures, before we can develop that ecosystem or that environment much better. Whereas in secondary succession, we're sort of at that point where everything's available and ready to go. It's just we've got a brand new, you know, soil profile that is already nutrient rich. And so what you'll see is in primary succession, the biodiversity is very, very low in the first, say, 150 years or whatever it is, whereas in secondary succession, we might get a much richer biodiversity at a much faster rate.